A single rabbit can turn a few pounds of grass into a pound of meat faster than almost any animal on the planet. She can get pregnant again within hours of giving birth. She can produce a new litter every month. And within 12 weeks, that litter is ready for the table. No other mammal humans have ever farmed comes close to that math. So here's the question that doesn't add up. If rabbit is this efficient, why isn't it sitting next to chicken and beef in every grocery store in America? Why does the idea of eating one feel, to most people in the English-speaking world, somewhere between strange and upsetting? Let's start with the numbers, because they're almost absurd. A cow takes roughly 9 months of pregnancy and another year and a half of growing before it's ready for slaughter. It eats enormous amounts of feed and water to get there, and it produces one calf at a time. A rabbit takes about a month to gestate. She can deliver 6 to 12 babies in a single litter, and she can be pregnant again the same day she gives birth. In theory, one female rabbit and her offspring could produce more usable meat in a year than a single cow produces in its entire lifetime. Rabbits also convert feed into protein more efficiently than cattle or sheep. They need a fraction of the water, and they can be raised in a backyard hutch instead of acres of grazing land. Environmentally, on paper, rabbit farming looks like one of the smartest ways to feed a planet running short on space and water. It's not just efficient to raise either. Rabbit meat is leaner than almost anything else on a menu, higher in protein per gram than chicken, beef, or pork, and lower in fat and cholesterol than all three. Nutritionists in the 1940s actually pointed to this. Wartime health pamphlets described rabbit as one of the healthiest proteins a family could put on the table. Cheap, lean, and easy to raise even in a city backyard. On efficiency, on nutrition, on cost, rabbit was quietly winning on almost every measurable category. At the exact moment it was about to disappear from Western plates for good. And this isn't some new discovery. Governments have known this for a long time. During the Second World War, when meat was rationed across the United States, the Department of Agriculture actively encouraged families to raise rabbits in their backyards. Pamphlets went out with titles like Domestic Rabbit Raising, promoting rabbit as a cheap, fast, high-protein alternative to beef and pork. In Britain, it was even more widespread. Wartime rabbit clubs sprang up in nearly every town, and rabbit meat became one of the most common proteins on the table, partly because rabbits weren't rationed the way beef and pork were. For a few years, tens of millions of people across 2 countries were eating rabbit regularly, and it wasn't strange at all. It was just dinner. Then the war ended, and something happened that's hard to explain with economics alone. Rabbit consumption in the US and UK didn't just decline, it collapsed. Within a couple of decades, rabbit had gone from a wartime staple to something most people had never tasted and weren't sure they wanted to. Meanwhile, chicken, a genuinely less efficient animal to raise pound for pound, exploded into the most popular meat in both countries. So what changed? One answer is disease. In the 1950s, a virus called myxomatosis tore through European rabbit populations. It was originally released deliberately in Australia to control wild rabbit numbers, and it spread from there, jumping between wild and domestic populations. The disease causes severe swelling, blindness, and a slow, visible death. The outbreak in Britain was especially brutal. Within 2 years of its arrival in 1953, myxomatosis had wiped out an estimated 99% of the wild rabbit population. Newspapers ran photographs of rabbits blinded and dying in fields, and public reaction split in an unexpected direction. Instead of treating it as pest control, working as intended, much of the country was horrified. Animal welfare groups condemned the disease as needlessly cruel, and for millions of people, the image of a suffering rabbit became inseparable from the animal itself. For a public that had just spent years eating rabbit regularly, watching it become associated with a horrifying, disfiguring illness did lasting damage to its reputation as food. But disease alone doesn't explain why rabbit never recovered once the outbreaks faded. For that, you have to look at what happened to rabbits outside the farm. Post-war prosperity meant more families could afford pets, and rabbits, small, soft, quiet, easy to keep in a hutch in the yard, became one of the most popular children's pets in both countries. At almost the exact moment rabbit farming was declining, rabbit keeping as a pet was rising. And culture noticed. Peter Rabbit had already been charming children since 1902. Bugs Bunny arrived in 1940, quick-witted, lovable, always outsmarting the hunter trying to eat him. Thumper hopped through Bambi in 1942. By the time a generation of American and British children grew up, rabbits weren't livestock in their imagination. They were characters. They had names, personalities, and famously, they always won. Psychologists have a term for what happens next. It's called the meat paradox, the discomfort that comes from loving animals while also eating them. Most people resolve that discomfort by mentally sorting animals into two categories, ones that are food and ones that aren't. And once an animal lands in the not food category in a culture's imagination, it tends to stay there, regardless of how efficient or practical it would be to eat. Pigs are, by most measures, at least as intelligent as dogs. Cows form friendships and hold grudges against specific individuals for years. None of that stops either animal from being farmed at massive scale, because neither one occupies the pet category in the popular imagination the way a rabbit does. The line was never really drawn by intelligence or efficiency. It was drawn by exposure, by which animals a culture grew up loving as characters instead of counting as dinner. There's a second, quieter reason too, one that has nothing to do with feelings and everything to do with factories. Chicken didn't just win because people liked it. Chicken won because it was, and still is, extraordinarily easy to industrialize. Chickens grow fast, they're small and uniform, and processing them on an assembly line is mechanically simple. Rabbits, despite their efficient biology, are awkward on an industrial scale. Their carcasses are oddly shaped, their bones are delicate and easily shattered by machinery built for other animals, and slaughtering them at speed has historically required far more manual labor than chicken does. So even though a rabbit converts feed into meat impressively well, the economics of scale never lined up in America or Britain the way they did for chicken. Rabbit stayed small, local, and slightly old-fashioned, while chicken became a national industry with its own supply chains, marketing budgets, and fast food empires built entirely around it. Here's where the story gets more interesting, though, because the premise of "we don't eat rabbit" isn't actually true worldwide. It's true in a fairly narrow slice of the world. In France, rabbit is a completely unremarkable menu item, sold in ordinary grocery stores next to chicken and pork. Italy has regional dishes built around it going back centuries. Spain, Portugal, China, and parts of Latin America all eat rabbit regularly, without any of the hesitation that shows up in the US or UK. China alone raises and consumes more rabbit meat than the rest of the world combined, hundreds of millions of rabbits a year, mostly without a second thought. So the real mystery isn't, why don't humans eat the most efficient meat available? Humans, broadly, do. The real mystery is much narrower. Why did two specific countries, the US and the UK, spend the 20th century building an emotional wall around one particular animal, right at the same moment that animal was proving itself to be one of the most practical sources of protein on Earth? It hasn't stopped people from trying to break that wall down. In the 2000s, chefs and food writers in both countries made repeated attempts to bring rabbit back into fashion, rebranding it on menus as an ethical, sustainable alternative to beef, exactly the pitch its efficiency has always supported. High-end restaurants in London and New York quietly added rabbit dishes, framing it as a delicacy rather than a wartime necessity. Almost none of it stuck at scale. The cultural memory of a childhood cartoon character turned out to be harder to overwrite than any marketing campaign, no matter how good the argument for efficiency really was. And once you see it that way, rabbit stops being a mystery about food efficiency and starts being a case study in how arbitrary our food categories actually are. There's no biological law that makes a cow dinner and a rabbit a companion. There's no nutritional reason chicken belongs on a plate and rabbit belongs on a couch. Those lines were drawn by a handful of cartoons, a frightening disease outbreak, and a set of factories that happened to be built around a different animal, at a moment in history when it could have gone either way. With global food systems under real pressure, land shrinking, water growing scarcer, and demand for protein climbing, some agricultural researchers have started asking whether it's time to redraw that line again, whether the animal that quietly outperforms most of our livestock on efficiency deserves a second look, wartime pamphlet and all. Because for a few years in the 1940s, none of this was strange. Families across two countries raised rabbits in the yard, fed them scraps, and ate them for dinner without a second thought, and it worked. The efficiency was never the problem. What changed wasn't the animal, it was us, and everything we quietly decided to feel about it since.